Welcome back to TECcast. Our guest for this episode is Dr. Rachel Myers, aka Dr. M, who currently serves as Dean of Equity and Inclusion and English Department faculty member here at Choate. Prior to Choate, Rachel served as the inaugural Director of Diversity and Inclusion and an English teacher at the Hotchkiss School. As an undergraduate at Binghamton University, Rachel earned her BA in Africana Studies with a minor in Sociology while playing 4 years of NCAA Division I basketball. She then went on to earn a PhD in African American and African Studies with a concentration in English from Michigan State University. Dr. M is a published scholar who has focused her research and writing on the experience of Black female athletes, media representation in sport, conceptions of masculinity in sport, and race in sport. Her first book, Race in Sports, a Reference Handbook, was published in January 2021, and in the spring of 2022, she was featured in 3 episodes of the LA Times podcast Binge Sesh, which unpacked the HBO series Winning Time. Rachel says her favorite aspect of Choate life is getting to know the students, in the classroom, through advising, through programming, and even in times of crisis, because the students here have the drive to be better versions of themselves and to make us, the adults, better along the way. I think you'll hear all that on display in this conversation. We were once again joined by science teacher and fellow academic technologist, Dr. Viva Zhao, who helped steer our discussion through a bunch of different topics, including Rachel's career journey, the process of writing her book, and the magic of citation software, the various ways that technology intersects with DEI work at Choate, including some reflections on our community conversations, Diversity Day, meeting diverse learners' needs, social media and personal identity, culturally responsive pedagogy, campus accessibility, the evolving nature of humanity and technology, parenting in a tech-saturated world. And finally, Rachel gave us a Spotify playlist tailor-made for those millennials out there. So we hope you enjoy this conversation with Dr. Rachel Myers. Thank you for joining us, Rachel.
You're welcome. Happy to be here.
Could we kick things off by having you tell us a little bit about your career journey to this point?
Sure. So it's important to know that I accidentally fell into the independent school world. I went to Binghamton University undergrad and, got a full scholarship there to play basketball. But when I was in high school, I fell in love with the sciences. I was a science kid, wanted to be a pediatrician or pediatric surgeon. So I was pre-med. And it was really in college where I discovered the humanities. I was a public school kid growing up, and so really didn't get excited, I would say, about much of what I read. I think the one memorable book was The Catcher in the Rye, which is a little bit ironic because I definitely spent a couple years teaching that book in my first job. I love Holden Caulfield. He's a wonderful character. And so I found myself finishing up my doctorate at Michigan State, had gotten married to my now ex-husband, who is from Connecticut originally. So that brought me to Connecticut. It was 2 weeks, postpartum with my son, Mollis, and had come across this diversity hiring fair. Had, put applications out to lots of the random, colleges and universities around this area. Hadn't really heard back from anyone. And decided to go to this diversity hiring fair that was held through the Sphere consortium of schools. So it's very much like West Hartford area, but Avon Old Farms, Loomis Chaffee. It was held at Watkinson School, which ended up being my first job. But Miss Porters were there. And just to give people perspective, I thought those were actual people, when I hear the names of schools. So I was like, I wonder who Miss Porter is. You know what I mean? And I was, 29 years old, so this isn't that long ago. And I got my first job, and it was wonderful to just be in a small classroom because I did not have that experience. And so even learning how to move around the classroom and not just stay at the front of the classroom, which was very much the educational model that I learned from, and learning more about group projects and all this stuff. So lo and behold, I spent a couple years at Watkinson, but family, economy, not great. Daycare is expensive. Really needed to make a switch that was best economically for me and my family. And so boarding school, someone directed me about boarding school. My response was isn't that where bad kids go to school? Little did I know about New England boarding schools and their history. Got hired at Hotchkiss School, stayed there for 6 years. And it was during that time, I will say that I kind of formally started pursuing more administration. and working my way up from being kind of rank and file faculty member, teaching the 4 sections, coaching the 2 seasons, all of that, to being a coordinator of diversity and inclusion initiatives at first, which was kind of like quarter time, didn't quite balance out well. I think that was probably like the worst year of me, like trying to be a professional in terms of delivering things that were like really of quality in terms of teaching and programming. And I'm grateful that Hotchkiss saw that wasn't really working either, and they created a senior level position. So I, had the privilege of being the inaugural director of diversity and inclusion there, still always remaining in the classroom. And even now, as I've started my choke career at the senior level already, which I think is different than having, started at a school and in a community as sort of like, I think the core level. I won't say like ground level, but like the core level of like what you do as like a teacher day in and day out feels different. It feels heavier, and really, really important in a number of ways. And I just hope I'm delivering. So that's kind of like so it was like a happy accident. And certainly along the way have been inspired, motivated by lots of people, and seen lots of things too that have been motivators to do more and like, step up and sort of say like, yes, I want that power to be able to like help organize and create change within schools related to equity and inclusion. And I will say, I think a lot of my draw to it, not only from like the Black studies background that I have in school, but I think also just growing up in the Philadelphia area, I was swimming in the sea of like diversity, I think, and equity and inclusion, I would say, just in terms of neighborhood and the kids that I grew up around, without realizing that was really an issue. Like I had a Black PhD elementary school principal named Dontina Jackson. And so like 5-year-old, kindergarten through 4th grade me even was like, oh yeah, like little did I know it's a very small percentage of Black women who even hold doctorates. So yeah, that's me. That's the journey. Yeah.
We're very grateful to have you here at Choate.
So Rachel, we've heard a lot about your book, and we're interested in learning more about it. So you can say a bit about that. Great.
The academic book, so it's probably gonna be a little bit boring at times. Like there's a whole chapter that's like annotated bibliography. So
that's okay.
That's
completely okay. Do I just get it on Amazon?
Well, the library has it available. Yep, the library has it. But yeah, it's also available on Amazon. I feel like it's on sale on Amazon too, so it's like $40. But
Ooh,
just
on sale.
Yeah, or just like make the school pay for it. It's fine.
Does it touch on diversity, equity, inclusion? Is this
I mean, not explicitly, but it just I think I did a good job of sort of the historiography and then tying it in with the academic piece. So like telling the story of like how the sociology of sport became like a field kind of thing. And that was really around like John Carlos, Tommy Smith, like the 72 Olympic, the 68 Olympics rather. And, the boycotting and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's a good read. Like if you like sport and you've ever wondered, like for example, I was for my dissertation stuff was really inspired when I went on a study abroad to South Africa, because I just found it so fascinating that in South Africa, like you didn't see any of the white people playing soccer, and like nothing but Black people were. But then coming from the U.S., like very much soccer is like perceived as like a quote unquote white sport.
Right.
And so I wanted to know more, and then learning about the history of the sport of soccer and how it was introduced by the British originally to diamond mine workers in Johannesburg. And so it was like a leisure activity of like diamond mine workers. And then when the Dutch took control and defeated the British, they basically came in and they were like, no, we're not playing this. This is like a Black sport. Like it was very like lesser than.
Interesting.
And so, yeah, still, you just don't see any white people playing soccer in South Africa. They play rugby, cricket. Yeah.
Which is their version of football.
Yeah.
Right.
Just like not not soccer though.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Didn't know that. I'm already learning lots.
Yeah. So
That's
it's,
awesome.
yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
You were saying earlier about a use of technology in creating that book, about the bibliography. Do you want to share about that?
So something that I discovered, I forget if I was still in grad school or not, but I definitely discovered the first book chapter that I wrote several years ago. Getting EndNote that like does bibliography for you and also kind of acts as this electronic library. So I essentially, took a lot of time, but like went through book by book of like just almost every book that I own and just entered all the information. And with that, the EndNote software, you could pick APA style, like MLA, like medical stuff. Like it had all of the different styles that you could possibly use for academic citation. And you just chose one, and it could do in-text citation. It can format your bibliography for you, like as you write. So that saved hours of time for like anyone that's ever put together a bibliography, even if it's just for, like your high school paper. It's still, you're like, oh man, I'm done writing this thing. Now I have to like do the bibliography, and you have to remember the rules about bibliographies too, because there's lots of different rules. Whether it's the indent and which part you do, and last name, first name, or what happens when there is no author, what happens when there's a list. So it's a lot of rules to remember. So it was really nice to have that technology.
So it automatically computes the citation.
Yep.
Turns out the citation and the in-text citation.
Yes.
Oh, that is so awesome. Okay,
It's
I'm gonna look
wonderful.
into.
Yes.
Sounds like a fun
And you can use footnotes.
to-
You can do,
fun
all of
activity.
it. It's great.
Cite while you write in Google Docs as well.
Yes.
Phenomenal. Okay. I'm going to look into this. Learn
It's
something
great,
else.
yeah.
And
It's-
we've only been here for 3 minutes.
It's really, yes. Like anyone who's in grad school, try to invest in that. And it was nice. When I worked at Hotchkiss, they did pay for that software to put it on my lap so I could continue as I got my book deal and all that kind of stuff. So that was nice.
Sweet.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about Diversity Day.
Yeah.
This year's theme was United in Difference, which I think so beautifully captures the importance of both honoring the transcendent one and unity of everything, and the manifest many and all the diversity that we see and experience as we go about our lives. So could you tell us more about that kind of vision for Diversity Day? What inspired you to land on that kind of tagline, and what other ways you and your office try to embody that theme of united in difference in your work?
So great question. So first and foremost, the themes for Diversity Day are ultimately chosen by the Choate Diversity Student Association. And that just has to do with, I think, the school's history around like students being involved in the creation of Diversity Day, the workshops being held and run and things like that. So they did a great, like, kudos to the students for picking that theme. And it was just all about, I think, a reflection of the past 2-3 years, right? With COVID, different political situations, literal war that's still going on between Russia and Ukraine. There's a lot of difference, a lot of things that are kind of like polarizing lots of different people, both domestically and internationally. And so I think the students, it was just kind of this perfect situation where you had this international figure, like the international figure. That's how I see Nelson Mandela, is kind of like, you say Nelson Mandela and kind of everyone will know who that is, no matter where you are in the globe. And so to have his grandson, and then to have someone as controversial as a figure like Malcolm X, and to have one of his daughters to be able to step in and have that conversation together about similar goals and yet different avenues to reach those goals, I think was really fantastic. And just a lot about, like, to see them sort of navigate and negotiate those differences, as well as, I think, really humanize. I know, especially for, again, this is just my perspective. For me, again, with a public school background, I'm hoping public school is a little bit different now, but I definitely was educated and sort of left my K through 12 education feeling like the Black Panther Party was like not a good group, and like kind of Malcolm X was like this really like scary black militant person, and it really wasn't until grad school and I started learning more and more and learning about that I was able to kind of like unlearn some of the things that were sort of forcibly like pushed onto me.
And like hearing sorry to interrupt, but just like what you just said reminded me of that moment. Hearing her speak about traveling around and like
in
playing
Vermont.
acoustic in Vermont, and
Malcolm
like
X likes Vermont. Like, you know, like I was just like, what? That's not where I would have pictured him going. So I think that was, it was just, I think a part of it humanizing everybody. Like, we are different. That doesn't mean that we have to be separate too. So I think, and that we can't come together for a common cause.
Yeah, they were both speaking so profoundly to the importance of love at the core of our interactions as humans, which was just really refreshing to hear. And I think everybody left that conversation really inspired.
Yes, absolutely. And then I think to sort of go even further, one of the questions, the secondary question about, how my team and I tried to kind of live that or like kind of spread that through what we do. And I think the program of community conversations, everything you wanted to know, but we're afraid to ask about, really tries to do that. The fact that both my own personal stance and certainly, what Choate espouses is like diversity is not a synonym for race. So we're not just going to talk about race as somebody's facet of identity. All of us are lots of different things. And so being able to have a program that happens within the academic day, that happens on a sort of like consistent cadence, that has sort of over the last 3 years become a part of Choate culture, I think feels great. Of like, it's normalized. Like, sometimes we gather in Colony Hall and the E&I team leads it, and we like talk about a facet of identity. And like, I've been going through that for 4 years, and I've learned a lot. And like, even if it's just like, I feel more comfortable asking kind of like uncomfy questions or like that or more personal questions to try to get to know somebody better. I think that's such an important skill as we graduate kids to go off to college. And, for, I think, again, the benefit of, this Choate education, they sort of have a leg up, so it won't be their first time living away from home for many of them, for most of our Choate students, aside from day students. But again, just, I think maybe equipping folks with a little bit more of those people skills in a time where it is questionable a little bit with technology and how much FaceTime we're doing with screens and things like that. But to have like a genuine conversation with a person, just like, hey, what do you think about this? Or like, how does this make you feel? Or like, hey, this is an experience I've had. Has that been your experience? Or like, do you have some sort of other perspective? I think is really healthy. So I hope that, the school continues to embrace that program and it continues to evolve. Like, we have some new ideas for next year. So this upcoming year, for example, that might be small, but we hope that it maybe does create an impact of actually choosing which question will be asked first, just as sort of like a softball, because we have the male identity and community conversation in particular showed some of the discomfort when like, oh, here's 2 questions in a row about sex or like romantic relationships or whatever it was, that people were like, ooh, we're not ready for that. Like, that was not the one, we just jumped right in the deep end. So we're going to try to like wade into the water this year with the conversations and see how that goes. And then also with our new advising system. So just being able to like consistently have some debrief conversations in advisory groups, as well as continuing spaces that would be offered, whether they be an affinity or like by student clubs or things like that, I think will be really healthy and in a good way for, I think, not only my team, but I think just the school itself, like we as a community, to help keep the culture going and moving forward, which kind of, as I said it out loud, I was like, and that's our theme for this upcoming year is #for the culture. Phrase, for the culture. So really excited, like offers out there. So I won't say who the keynote will be, but hopefully they accept it within the next couple of weeks and we'll get that squared away. But you've heard it here first what the theme is.
Exclusive.
Exclusive.
I'm glad you mentioned the male identity community conversation, because it's an example of what you've said about the spirit of community conversations is not, this thing is not supposed to be the thing that checks the box on, conversation had, but is like, if you describe it as an appetizer?
Yes.
And that specific one, yes, that was, people came out of that. Some people were like really upset and what that led to, like I witnessed in each of my classes the next day, it led to these amazing conversations in the context of the class where kids were walking away from those conversations with new insights about like tangible things that they want to do to help progress the culture at show and gender relations and everything. So
100%.
Yeah.
That's it. Like that's the goal, everybody. I don't have a master plan. It's just really like, let's get us talking, because it's the great mind, not the great minds think alike, but like two heads are better than one. So it's like we have 870 students plus 200 adults, and if you can just bring us all in a room to just have a little chatsy, some good things. I think some good things can happen, with structure and like shared understanding. That's why we have those wonderful community norms and all that kind of stuff.
We were talking before we started recording about doing community conversations during the pandemic, and obviously leaning into technology.
Yes.
There, is there anything you want to speak to on that experience of trying to bring the community together in those exceptional circumstances, and what roles technology played in, and if there's any insights that you took from that you, or practices or uses of technology or anything that you've kept even in the quote unquote post-pandemic
Yeah,
world?
I mean, it's just like shout out to anybody involved in a community conversation on Zoom, because I think it has helped us improve and add to, I think, community conversations as a program. Like it is a viable alternative format to hold community conversations on Zoom. It's thanks to the Choate community about, we've had one community conversation where we had a guest, Ken Win Chu, who came and was a guest speaker at the first AAPI identity community conversation that we had that kind of controversially was optional. And then we had another one that was required, if you go back to thinking about that. But that was really wonderful, because like we kind of heard from a guest and then also allowed her to kind of participate in some, in answering some of the questions as somebody who also identified under the AAPI umbrella. We also, thanks to Cho and the suggestions from students, like added in that layer of student co-hosts, which was huge. So sort of, giving a student or two that sort of really visible like leadership sort of position and sort of and responsibility, I would say, because the student co-host and all of them did such a wonderful job of holding that confidentiality, holding that anonymity of students and or adults who were also contributing their responses to questions that did not feel comfortable unmuting themselves and sort of speaking live on the Zoom. So I think that was really wonderful. Also, just the varying levels of comfort. Like it was okay. It's okay, or it is okay in terms of the Zoom sort of conversation community norms to not have your screen on, like your camera on.
Yeah.
Because as we learned really quickly in the pandemic, right, like people live in different spaces. Some students were studying, at the kitchen table with siblings around, and they're all like, okay, everybody put your noise canceling like headphones on, and this is it, And so there were lots of different reasons. I know I had a couple of students in my first year teaching here who had jobs while they were at home because of their circumstances, and they were literally listening to my class while they were working. And so, yeah, I'm not going to say you have to have your screen on and things like that, especially as you are being vulnerable. So I think that has added a real layer that, just to be candid and very honest, it's like that goes away when we're in person. Like you can't, like, people are going to turn and look at you when you're like, I have the microphone, and there is going to be that piece of it. So you can't really hide per se. And there's definitely, I think, less participation in terms of the responses. Like, it was kind of nice with that added layer on Zoom. And that's not to say that we won't have one. I mean, so the topics of political identity and racial identity are pretty heavy and big and open themselves up to anyone participating in our community. And so I could see us maybe trying to do that on Zoom, because it does offer the opportunity with that extra co-host to kind of like pause and be like, okay, co-host, like, let's check in, Morgan. Do you have responses? And you might say like, yep, I've heard from 6 different people. 3 of these responses are from adults. And you kind of like rattle them off really quickly. Whereas obviously when you wait for hands to be raised and you got to walk over, get the microphone, pull, it can go a little bit more swiftly. I think you can get to some more questions and then also some more responses if it is the Zoom format. So shout out to technology and Zoom specifically, because I prefer it over other things. So
I'm really liking what I'm hearing.
Okay.
Being inspired, and seems like technology is used in a way where it really caters to the needs of the learners. Right? Not only does it increase productivity, but it really is in this case, Zoom is used in a way where it meets diverse learners' needs.
Yep.
Right? And so along the same lines, in your role and in your experiences working at Choate, have you seen specific examples of successful projects or initiatives in your role or in other people's roles or classrooms where technology has been effectively utilized to bridge gaps and to promote inclusivity?
Yeah, I mean, I know it's going to seem like the first thing that came to my mind, even though it seems really small, but like, so when I was at Hotchkiss, and I've done a similar thing here, and I'm glad that we continue to utilize a form, but like just utilizing a Google form to capture like who plans to observe Ramadan through fasting. And so sort of just rather than doing sort of like whisper down the lane of like everybody who's observing Ramadan needs to have a conversation with every single person they interact with throughout a week or a month, really, right? It lasts a month, that we can have a list and know as a school, and then be proactive, and sort of all the deans can email the kid. So it's, again, that's just more of like an efficiency. But I think from the personal standpoint of it, and I heard from, and I won't say what colleague I heard from, and this was related to a different religious holiday, but like even just supporting of staff, like, hey, if you might need coverage because you're going to be out like celebrating this like non-Christian holiday, it felt really validated. Like this faculty member was just like, in all of my years here, like this is the first time I felt really like seen and acknowledged of like the importance of this holiday in my life. And so, and that it was just a form, like, you know what I mean? Like it's just, and if anyone could tell, I'm not that tech savvy. Like there was not going to be like mention of a lot of apps and things like that used. Although did use a lot, like Notable was great during the pandemic in my class, because there was a lot of personal writing and workshopping. And so to do a writer's workshop when people are in like Japan and Hong Kong and California and New York, it was awesome to have notability.
Okay, that's
sorry. I said notable.
That's cool, I'm sure.
Sorry, notability. I messed up your name. Yeah, notability was great. So yeah, a simple form was really wonderful. So I think of that along like the religious realm has been helpful. Obviously, the Zoom aspect of like community conversation and being able to leverage that. Also, just I've used Zoom to kick off the Pathways program, which is our mentoring program for our newest students of color to opt into, and they are mentored by our student leaders who have applied and been accepted to be Pathways mentors, so they're 5th and 6th formers. But we offer just an optional Zoom for our newest Pathways families of color, as well as our faculty and staff of color. Invite coming soon. They have to like put it on people's calendar. But it's just like, hey, if you have that hour and 15 minutes free on that like random, it's like a Thursday the week before we're supposed to be back, and it's just literally like icebreaker questions and like just some like we spend time, any of the faculty and staff that show up, like I asked you to introduce yourself. So it's just a way, because as I think we all know, move-in day is like chaos. And, you know, I think for the parents, not only are they inundated with a lot of information, they also just want to kind of like hang out with their kids that they're dropping off, you know, maybe for the first time ever, for like stay away from them for a whole year. And so to have an opportunity to know that myself and Miss Ford and Jillian Forg like aren't the only two folks of color that they will ever see, or like that, or just present on campus. Like I think that does a good job. And then and inevitably, some of our faculty and staff of color end up being those kids' teachers, and so there's already like a kind of nice connection, I think, and a little bit of, I think, added comfort, which is why we sort of have pathways too, is sort of acknowledging like, hey, this could feel scary. This is not, boarding school in general is usually not a part of, at least in multiple generations of, of our families' histories, like it is with some, families that, who are white identifying coming here. And like, get comfortable. You belong here, check it out, get to know people, get to meet people. So Zoom's been really helpful there. Other than that, I think I've just kind of, a lot of the program, it's just the usual tech. Like I think it's a privilege to be at a school in a place where we can really easily, with a click of a button, like record any speaker, because we have that set up within our auditorium. Like, again, public school can't do that at Cheltenham High School. You probably still can't do that at Cheltenham High School. But whether it's like to video record it or just like audio record, I mean, I think that we're set up in so many wonderful ways. And then to be able to share that out, we talk about a huge thing with equity, and I think technology is like access. And so when you can offer something, the accessibility, especially when it is for free, particularly to families who are sending their kids from all over the world, all over, in different socioeconomic needs, different schedules, right? Hectic. Like everybody can't make that, Thursday opening night at the PMAC or whatever. And then, they work all weekend because that's their job. But like, don't worry, Mom, I can send you the video afterwards. It's not a problem. Like, it's okay. You're going to see exactly what everybody else saw just a little bit later. I think that can have a huge impact on people. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you, Rachel. You've identified some great ways that we can use tech to streamline the logistical process of things, and also increase accessibility, enhance the platforms for communication. But what are some challenges, or what are some barriers and challenges our school community faces when using tech to promote equity and inclusion?
So I think even just talking about that, and as I watch this like screensaver of campus, so I'm thinking about accessibility too, like, and this came up in our last community conversation on neurodiversity and disability at Choate, but like literally for those who are physically disabled, a challenge, I think naturally, and I experienced this firsthand when I like tore my Achilles while I was at Hotchkiss, like if you're able-bodied person, you're like not really doing a great job thinking about, as you navigate and walk around, how difficult it would be if you're not, if you weren't walking around, if you were like wheeling around, like what different route you might have to take, or like, can you get into that building, or do you have to walk all the way around it to be able to get into it? And so I sort of brought that up in the community conversation because not too long after that community conversation, I think we had Grandparents' Day. And so sort of and this is just a suggestion, just in case anyone in communications listens to this podcast, that next year for Grandparents' Day, like, again, maybe it's just a creation of a form, but like if we have a clear list of like people who are going to want like golf cart, like they're just going to need assistance navigating our campus, that maybe we have a list of their names, maybe a contact info just in case, maybe that we actually publicize like where exactly there will be like stops to get a golf cart just in case you like didn't register that you were going to need that assistance. I think that could be helpful, because it was my understanding that like we didn't really have a plan per se, and it was just kind of like, oh, if you just see a golf cart, you flag it down. Which, again, depending on how somebody's moving, right? If I use a walker and I have to like flag someone down, am I now like unstable? I don't know. I just, again, like, I'm not trying to be nitpicky, but just, I think we could use technology in that way to navigate that little challenge that there definitely is like equity and inclusion, but it is also the challenge of like none of us thought of that, and like I've thought of it after the fact, like that we heard from somebody as we were going over like the plan for Grandparents' Day, and then we had the community conversation. So I asked, and I was like, "Did we ask about like, do we know like how did they sign up?" And it was like, "No, there was no sign up. But there'll be golf carts around, so I think we can do that better." But yeah, there's a very real challenge, I think, just in general of right for all things, fill in the blank of the identity, right? You're like you're gonna be like, oh, like you're really upset because you can't pray in the middle of the day. Like that's not something that you do or grew up with, you're gonna be like, I don't like, why is that such a big deal? I don't do that. So it's gonna. I understand. I think I do a pretty good job of like empathizing with all people, and I understand why people don't easily side one way or the other. I guess like I think I do a good job listening of like trying to like do the devil's advocate thing. So I understand like wasn't shocked when Donald Trump won. Like, like there were people like weeping around me, and you know, did I love it? No. Was I surprised? No, because I know what the nation's history is or whatever. Like, and I also fully recognize that there were probably a number of people who were saying they weren't going to vote for him, but that actually did, because they did agree with some of the things that he was saying that had nothing to do with the misogyny or the racism or the xenophobia that he was displaying. So it was not a surprise. Like, my emotional state was sort of like intact. But I think that's the hard part about DEI work, DEI, BJ, all the words, belonging, justice, equity, inclusion, diversity. They're all really, really personal to people. So maybe I just do a good job of like trying not to take things personally, or like, I don't know.
Bringing up the Trump election leads me to inquire about going back to that moment in time. That seems to be what really put on people's radar how, and this is profiled in The Social Dilemma, right? Like how the social media landscape shapes personal identity formation. And we saw a lot of the clear kind of darker sides of that during that time.
Yes.
But I wonder if you could speak to that dynamic of both the pros and cons of how technology in general, and definitely particularly social media, shapes the way that we conceive of who and what we are.
Yeah. I mean, so social media is great. I mean, it can be really great and it can be really painful, right? Like depending on how you approach it and I think use it, it can be super validating for like, because you can find things that make you feel really affirmed and like-minded folks and communities and all of that kind of stuff. And it can also pigeonhole you from like being aware of a lot of other perspectives and other ways of being. So I think there's just a lot of education that needs to happen, which is like the different number of ways that you can approach technology. Like, just I think the same way with, you know, we're all as educators, everyone's like, oh my God, the AI, like the artificial intelligence. You know, I teach English. It's like, oh, it's the end of the English paper. Like, never again. Like, everyone's going to plagiarize. It's going to be a thing. And at the same time, I'm like, I kind of see it as an opportunity. So I'm somebody, I teach seniors, and even though I think the majority of the seniors I've taught like have been here for 4 years, like they still end up in like different, I think, writing skill levels. And so I think about, just from like a structural point of writing, for example, like could the use of Chat GPT help a kid who really struggles to like structure an essay, give them a semblance of like, oh, okay, I see what Chat GPT, like, okay, like, could I ask them to print out the prompt that they give Chat GPT, what it spits out, and then say, okay, I want you to look at this and I want you to find the transition statements and like explain to me why they're strong transition statements. Like if somebody's like struggling to grasp what I mean by like you're not creating a very smooth transition between your paragraphs or like topic to like your thoughts or something like that, and then trying to get them, through again an AI generated thing, so I don't have to spend like an hour of my life creating this like prompt or whatever, but creating an example, and like better yet, create an example with the actual characters in the book that we're reading, complete with like an in-text citation or whatever, like, and get that kid to identify, like, do you see where the context was provided before the quote? So you kind of, if you never read this book, you could understand what was happening before this quote happens. And then they analyzed it. Like, that's a big thing. I'm being a nitpicky English teacher right now, but a big thing that just grinds my gears is when people throw in quotes for quote's sake, and then you don't provide any context, and like you're reading the essay and you're like, who just said that? And you're like, what?
Yep.
And what's going on? And I don't know. Or as the teacher, I'm like, okay, I remember, like, all you had to do was write like one or two more sentences. Like, when our protagonist Josephine encounters her estranged husband in the kitchen, panic ensues, then have the like shouting quote or whatever. But okay, I'm rambling, sorry.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah.
I've realized that now this might be something that I bring up in every single conversation that we had. So, and I promise I'm not getting paid by these people, but what you just described with like the out of context quotes triggered in my mind about another very compelling use case for the collaborative annotation software that we have built into Canvas. So imagine, in your whatever book kids are reading, as they read, they're instructed to make at least like 3 annotations each chapter or whatever, right? So then when it comes time to write the paper, you'd be like, hey, you actually already found significant quotes and you analyze them, because your comment, that's like some analysis.
Yep.
So then that quote has potentially way less of a risk of just being randomly dropped in, because they've already added their commentary in a social context where maybe it feels more natural for the kids, because they're just like, oh, I'm here in this space.
Right.
And then they can translate that into their paper.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
Plug
technology.
complete.
Yeah.
I kind of want to learn. So our theme for diversity conversations this upcoming year is
for Diversity Day.
for the culture. That's what it's called.
Yeah. The theme is for the culture.
For the culture. And so I've been thinking a little bit about it, and first of all, I'm extremely excited, and I don't know if this is the space or time to give a little bit more information about it, because based on our conversation thus far, it just reminds me of all the seminal authors and researchers in education who have talked a lot about culture and culturally responsive instruction and the intersection between education and equity and inclusion and technology. And so it reminds me of one of the seminal authors, one of my favorite seminal authors, who really has done a lot of work in culturally responsive instruction, and that's Geneva Gay. And I believe that the quote was, teaching that ignores students' identities or cultures is a form of educational malpractice, right? And so I want to talk a little bit more about that, because I think dismissing and ignoring cultural identities of students ultimately hinders growth and learning for both the students and the educators, right? So how can we utilize tech? How can we utilize tech to celebrate and embrace, and intentionally celebrate and embrace and recognize diverse cultures?
Yeah, it's a big question and a great question. So one of the ways that I think we're starting to see it, and even with this is making me thinking about alum class of 96 Natalie Egan, and thinking about how DEI sort of started off as this sort of first visible thing, right? It was diversity, and it was like very much like visible diversity. So you saw a lot of it like within our realm, sort of in independent schools, through the admissions offices, right? Like numbers, we needed like quantifiable data, and then now it's more about like inclusion, belonging, right? And more about like policies, practices, procedures. And so Natalie and her company has developed a tool where kind of this avatar can sort of help deliver content for DEI sort of training, right? And you figure out, curate the content and things like that. But what that does then is you're like, oh, well, what do you need a human for? Well, I think as we all know, the whole one-off workshop model thing doesn't really, it's not super effective.
Right.
It can be a great launching starting point, right? For example, we're having a practitioner come and it's our first kickoff faculty staff kind of training. It's a shared experience. It gives common knowledge, common language. So I don't want to say that they're completely not useful, because that's not true. And at the same time, when you're talking about E&I and culture shifts and palpable change, that's going to come through a lot of accountability piece too. So I think technology is a good way to leverage that and try to hold people accountable, whether it's the creation of different modules that people need to go through, that you can have an interactive avatar. So you kind of feel so you're not just, as if you're taking the GRE again, and it's oh, here's the stagnant words on the page, and now I have to decipher it, analyze it, and pick a right multiple choice question, but one where so it seems like a person's talking to you. I think that can be really helpful, or being able to incorporate videos to give actual examples is really helpful. I think for me as somebody who's a practitioner that has a lot of hard conversations, right? Bias incident report, somebody's doing something, and sometimes you do wish you had a visual video of let's unpack this little scenario that because sometimes people need to sort of, the mirror needs to be held up to them, so to speak, of oh, now that I've seen that thing almost out of body play out, and oh, I realized I was just that person and did something harmful or wrong or whatever. So I think technology can be leveraged in that way, I think, in the DEI space. So again, with the sort of efficiency. So if you have an avatar that's delivering content, that frees it up. And this is the way Natalie really, I think, did a great job explaining it, of it frees up the human being in the room to really walk around and sort of be that accountability partner, and check-in partner, be hey, are you okay? For example, if somebody's in distress with what the content is, now as a facilitator, you don't have to pause the program. You can take care of where that person is. Maybe their screen is paused and their progress, but you can also take care of feelings, emotions, real time things that are happening, while other people can continue on with the content that's supposed to be going on. So again, I just think that's kind of cool, right? Because if you have people, right, even though yes, nothing beats a person, and people are limited in what you're able to do, and sort of the multitasking piece, or especially if you're trying to facilitate something with a really, really large group. So yeah, I think that's what I would sort of start to, where I see, I think, DEI and sort of technology going towards. And of course, I think similar to any type of teaching or presenting, right, just technology, it's just a useful tool to help get different modes across, or navigate people who learn differently, right? We're going to listen to something now. We're going to watch something now. We're going to go into small group work. We're going to go all of those different things where you can have a breakout room, or, a form to fill out to get everybody's feedback really, really easily and quickly. And it's all condensed for you. And it's on a spreadsheet. That's awesome. And things that, our own parents didn't have to navigate. They might have been passing out just 3x5 cards. If you can write a few sentences, right? And then you have to go home and decipher everybody's handwriting. So, if you're lucky.
Yeah.
Is that avatar tool something that we could feasibly integrate into our faculty professional development curriculum?
So that's, I think, the
really
next
awesome.
What we're talking
conversation. And particularly what I am very fascinated in is if we get it for staff. Because there is no requirement. Staff are not beholden to the cultural competency requirement, whereas faculty are. Gotcha. And we have 4 years to do it. I think it would be really interesting if we could use that software to help curate and build content that's relevant to all those different staff departments, some of which are very student facing, but others, facilities, not so much. but they might have to do with like incorporate, like coming into a household maybe that you're not familiar with and different practices. Like, are you removing your shoes if you're going into Yassine Benzanine's home? As something like it just culturally these different things. Like, are you aware of these different things as you navigate different spaces and places on campus? The physical accessibility. Is somebody moving in that has some physical disability or issues? Are we being sensitive around that? Do we know the kinds of questions to ask about their mobility needs? I don't, I'm just winging it right now, but that would be kind of neat to just be able to deliver that training again. Like, if it can be developed and is sort of like housed with, the use of that software and that avatar, and to be able to continually deliver that content as you onboard new people to the facilities department could be really great. Because again, that shared language, all of that, and it takes the onus off of the department head or the director of facilities to have to like re-deliver it in that way. Like, they can just facilitate it, which I think could be pretty cool.
Tell me about how your understanding of what it means to be human is evolving.
So I think that question in terms of technology and especially AI, I think that humans appreciate and value, or maybe I'm just speaking from the I perspective, this human appreciates efficiency. That's actually something that I do with my team. There's this, I went to a leadership training and heard of this like Trojan horse activity kind of thing. And one of the questions, and it's just kind of a either or question about what do you value more, speedy work or deliberate work? Ooh. And I'm somebody who's like speedy work. Like, I want to check the box. I want to do the thing. And it's not that I'm not also deliberate and thoughtful, but it's harder for me, I think, to slow down sometimes and make a plan. And I think with some of the AI stuff, for example, it's really helpful. So let's say I'm trying to put together a program, and maybe it is like a panel or something like that, where you're trying to get a lot of different voices, equal airtime or something. You're not quite sure how to do it. I mean, you could put in a prompt, right? Like, I'm planning a program and I have 4 different speakers and 70 minutes and whatever, and some people may think, oh, that's certain division or whatever, an easy math problem, but AI can go so much deeper than that. It's kind of like, all right, well, like, here's an example structure, and then you can say, okay, great. Like, what are some potential questions you would ask your 3 guests who have to do with blah, 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 or like 4 guests or whatever. So it can just kind of like take brainstorming, I feel like, to the next level, and potentially, I think, unlock certain efficiencies, like I said, that we can maybe adapt to, or like just learn to just start thinking a little bit differently in the way that we approach it based off of something that, AI has generated for us.
Yeah, love it. What you were saying reminded me of something we've been using on our team too. That's not GPT-4, not like, but which that's what everyone knows as AI is like, oh, this chatbot thing, which is amazing and does all sorts of interesting stuff. But there's also other, of course, the specific technologies that are labeled as AI are. There's a huge umbrella of different actual.
Right. There's like photo ones and
so I don't know what the specific AI thing is behind this app called Motion, but basically any administrator who has like all these different hats that they have to wear and constantly working through projects and stuff, I think that this is extremely promising for. It basically, do you use to-do lists or anything? Okay.
Yeah, yes. I just use the sticky notes like thing on the computer and just have a massive to-do list on there.
And when you sit down and have to decide what you're going to work on, you have to like look at all those and decide, right?
Yep.
So I found myself with this issue, having used to-do lists faithfully for a very long time, using the Getting Things Done system. Andrew Spire is all about that, And what I found was when it came time to sit down and I have that magical hour where I can actually sit and get some stuff done, I would be overwhelmed by the mountain of things. That's like, what do I even pick to start on? So with this thing, Motion, you input the same information that you would input in a traditional task manager, like the name of the task, how long you think it might take, and when it needs to be done by. And you can input tags and all sorts of other stuff too. But just the combination of those 3 things, it'll feed it into this AI engine and then put into your actual calendar events how long you specified they would take in your daily calendar that you can check off as you go through. And if something, some emergency comes up and you say, no, this is as soon as possible, it'll insert that up front, move all the other things down in your calendar. So imagine like sitting down at your calendar and manually moving like 20 different events. It's impossible. It's like you have to go into each one and change the times or drag.
Yeah.
This will just
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah. And it works with teams, so you can say, hey, this is Jillian's owning this one, Cindy's owning this. You get a dashboard as the director to see like where everybody is on their projects. You can put comments and stuff.
Oh,
like,
neat. Oh, I love that.
Yeah. So
there's a couple projects out there. Yeah.
I just have a couple things kind of bringing it home here. Touched on this a little bit in the dining hall, but I'd love as a fellow parent for you to share what that journey has been like with just acknowledging the crazy world of technology out there, and you're bringing another life into this world, and what kind of approaches, practices, etc. do you use with your son to help try to make sure that all these wonderful benefits that we've talked about technology are tapped into, and while also attempting to avoid some of the more nefarious effects?
Yeah. So it's been a journey thus far. So like when my kiddo, when he was just like a baby, obviously not all the time. It was just more of like when I needed to watch television, he was just around. But then as he has gotten older, he did, and his dad and I divorced when he was 4. So that sort of introduced a different aspect of like, okay, there's distance. I was still at Hotchkiss. There's no cell service in Lakeville, Connecticut. It's literally like call through Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
So I think he first got like a little, not even like an iPad. It was kind of like a tablet kind of thing. So he had one of those to just more so for like the car rides, to be able to like entertain his 4-year-old self. We went through like the Gizmo watch, which is not great for young children because they're not really responsible with watches.
Oh, okay. That's the thing where you have like a little app and it shows where they can send a message to you.
Yes, and all they can do is like send a message to like parents.
Pick me up, Mom.
It's like super simple, but not great when you have like a kid who's like smashing their arms and flailing, and there's like it broke very quickly. Anyway. And now my son's 11, but he's had a phone for a while. And so which is pretty early. Like I didn't have a phone until it was like in 9th grade or something. And that was Nokia phones that didn't even text.
Yeah.
So, it's like the phone everyone just wore around and no one called each other during the school day. So he does like a combination. We are in my house. There is a video game in terms of consoles, free house. Like I don't have anything on a PlayStation. There's not a Nintendo Switch. There's not a nothing. That's not the case when he's at his dad's house for the weekend. So my child is skilled somewhat in the video. Like he can use it as a social tool, but it's just not in my home. I just want him to focus more on other things. And so with that, I was right. My mother is a mathematics person, degree in math, and then has a master's in computer science. Like went to Hampton, was like inspired by like Katherine Johnson, and like she's a pretty big nerd. But anyway, like shout out to Mom, love you, Mom. But with that, like I grew up because of the computer science. Like I grew up in a home with an Apple green screen, like. And knew how to was coding, but didn't realize I was coding because that's how you have to like plug it in and do Oregon Trails, like C semicolon / Like I could type in the whole thing, like Carmen Sandiego _ like
dude, you did the Carmen Sandiego game too. Oh yeah,
Carmen Sandiego, Oregon Trail all day, like on the Apple green screen, like nothing better.
That's awesome.
And then also learning how to type. So that's been big. Like he has a desktop, so. Saying like you need to learn how to type and like do it without looking at the keys, which is the way that I was taught, and doing different like computer games and interfacing because now and like we have kids in the education system. Well, I know you're about to have a kindergartner in there, but like they'll learn they have that time, whereas like when I was in school, and again public school, it was like you might have like each class has a computer, like that's that one person could sit at a time. And then you had like actual class called computer class, And then there were multiple computers. So it's just a very different thing. Whereas now, even in public schools, oftentimes we'll have like, hey, we're giving everybody these loaner laptops, and like everyone has access to a Chromebook. Maybe you don't get to take it home, but like in class, every kid can have this Chromebook. So your kids kind of need to know how to navigate that. That's been my experience, and that's even within the public school system. And then this upcoming year, I will be a private school parent for the first time. So I'm really interested to see how that, well, one, I think because Wallace is going into 6th grade, so like he'll have homework for the first time, but like, or like really graded homework, I should say, like grades. But I also want to see what the expectations around like technology and schoolwork are. Now that he's switching to, and he's going to like a pre-K to 8 school. So I don't know, like if somebody's like, all right, everybody, we're going to hop on Padlet, like Padlet's not something that public school is using, but I could see maybe like they are utilizing a lot more technology at Independent Day School, which is where he's going to go. But
cool.
So we'll see. Yeah, we'll see. Cause they also let the kids go outside and stuff, which is nice.
Yes, they do.
He needs to get his like activity on.
Yeah.
So.
Very cool. The common question we make sure to ask all our guests, we fondly recall all the Zoom sessions you held during the pandemic. There were some bangers.
So many Zooms.
of intro music coming in, right? And so we always like to ask everyone if you have any music recommendations for fellow faculty, whether that is for times when you need to sit down and do some grading or class prep, or just general hanging out, or anything else, any music that you feel compelled to share with the community.
So this might come as a shock. So I'm a big music person. Like, you know how like you get into a car and either the driver is putting on like NPR or a podcast or like Audible, or they're putting music on. I put music on every time. So that's just me. So if you're talking about in the context of like getting work done or like grading, I can't put on music with lyrics because I will sing the song. Like I won't be focused on what I'm actually doing, which is interesting considering writing my book, like most of my dissertation, other than like the translation pieces, like I need background noise, so I can have the television on all day long. Wow. And like you will not find me in the quiet corner of a library, like at all. To me, that's like my personal worst nightmare, because then you sneeze and people are like, oh my gosh, you're so loud. And I'm like, I don't want to hear myself breathing as I like write a paper or anything like that. Yeah. But I found classical music is really helpful and you can go to Spotify and it's like classical for productivity or like whatever. Like there's lots of different playlists for classical music, and it's actually really helpful for me in terms of being productive. But if you're just like trying to have a good time, I highly recommend a Spotify playlist called BS Brunch Baddies.
All right.
I did not make this playlist, nor did one of my friends. So it actually stems from a restaurant that was super good in San Antonio that I went to literally every single day that I was there for the People of Color Conference this past year. In the restaurant, we were like, everyone in the restaurant starts like singing along. It's a very much like old school, like 90s, early 2000s. So like basically like if you're in your 30s, like you're just gonna be like, wow, this is like the best place ever. The food was wonderful. It was a brunch spot, so you had some good drinks too. And you found yourself just like humming along, and you're like, oh my gosh, Mariah Carey and Old Dirty Bastard. Haven't heard that. Sweet Fantasy. Haven't heard that in so long. You're like, you know, and as you like have your chilaquiles, that was really, really good. But yeah, BS Brunch Baddies, highly recommend. Spotify, great.
Is this created by Sir Edward?
I don't know who was created. Maybe it's like the owner. I don't know, but like it's just you're gonna jam out to it.
Got Fabulous.
Yes,
up top.
all of it. Yes. Yes, and it's like amazing, and I'm just like, have you seen my high school childhood? Yeah, yes.
Oh yeah, Chingy. I forgot.
Yes, Chingy. Like, come on. Like, it's like you can't help but sing along to this playlist. So yeah, That's my like recommend. I've been recommending it to everybody. I'm like, you gotta listen to this playlist. It's amazing.
Oh wow, yeah, this really is bringing back. Oh yeah, there we go. There's some So Fresh,
like
So Clean.
SWV or like En Vogue is on there. I'm like, yeah, like there's definitely some Backstreet Boys on there too.
Nice, sweet. Well, we'll be sure to link it.
Yes, back when music was music. Everyone.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
This is great. Thanks for having me again.
Our pleasure.